If you're looking to move out of your parents' place, you could really cut expenses by bundling your car and renter's insurance with Progressive, which is good because your little brother has gotten really territorial. You're blood related. You'd think it would be fine to share food in the fridge. I mean, who writes their name on every individually wrapped slice of cheese, Tyler? Still, you've got to admire the commitment. So bundle your renter's and car insurance with Progressive and use the savings to help you move out and have all the cheese you want. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliates and third-party insurers.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread, or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.
Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app. We're on Red Circle, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, also 5 Reasons YouTube channel and Spotify. If you go to 5 Reasons YouTube, you find all of our other content, including Pulse of Fins Nation, which was on tonight. Also, 5reasonsports.com, spell that one out, and check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm going to mention both our fantasy and our gambling partners at the start here. Fantasy Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Get your initial deposit matched up to $100. We're doing shows all week long to get you ready for the Super Bowl. They got a free Patrick Mahomes square. Take advantage of it. Go to Prize Picks, get that initial deposit matched up to $100. You got to use the code 5, F-I-V-E. You can play NFL and NBA together with NHL if you want as well. We got our guy Alex Baumgartner giving you all the picks, and he was 4 for 4 the other night. Also, check out Better Edge. Go to Better Edge. That's with an O, betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN at that one, 5RSN. Get $20 to play. This is peer-to-peer legal sports betting. The other stuff you guys are doing is not legal. This is legal. You can find the line you want. Go to betteredge.com, and we're running Super Bowl competitions there this week. Use the code 5RSN. That's the number 5RSN when you go there. And now, tonight's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Yeah. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. I've got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. We are just basically going to move this thing along a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the players that the Heat may be in on right now, or could get in on, but we're going to start with the trade of the day. And of course, this was not a blockbuster, but we knew that Dewayne Dedmon wouldn't be playing a whole bunch more for the Miami Heat. This was just a miraculously bad season for Mr. Dedmon. Came in 2 years ago. He played really well for them, I thought, as a backup center, coming kind of straight off the couch. There's a playoff game against Milwaukee that I swear to you, if you look back at it, he was the best player on the floor for the Heat. He was okay at times last season, and he was just abominable this season. And that was before the massage gun incident and everything else, where he only, I believe, played once after that. UD was getting minutes ahead of him. Spoelstra didn't want to play him at all. It was pretty clear, and for good reason. He was a minus 11 net rating this season while playing 11 minutes a game. That is hard to do. He was minus 11 per 100 possessions, and essentially every time that Bam went out and Dedmon came in, the Heat would fall behind by 8 points. It was a given, and they had to make it up. So the other part of the news today, as we get to the trade, and Greg, we'll talk about the ramifications of the trade, was that Orlando Robinson in practice said he's going to try to play through his injury. We thought that might be a month. So Orlando Robinson was trying to get a regular contract from the Heat, but that gave the Heat a little bit more flexibility, I think, to make this move today, because they know that the guy who had replaced Dedmon in the rotation will be available. The trade itself, Dewayne Dedmon and a second-round pick for cash considerations. They also get a trade exception in the deal. We will talk about what that means. It's funny because you mentioned this on our off-the-floor feed about a month ago when Dedmon had the incident with the massage gun. You said, send him to San Antonio tomorrow. It just took him a month. But the reason that the Spurs were the place is they're dumping ground for contracts right now because they're so far under the cap. So let's get to it. Greg, why make this trade today?
Well, Brian Goins of Miami Heat Beat is a great resource, and he summed it up great on Twitter. So I'm going to steal a little bit of the facts that he spewed about the Dewayne Dedmon deal, because it's a head scratcher in a silo. But I think if we look at this more holistically, it could end up making more sense. But we have to see, obviously, what takes place. So they make this trade. They use a second-round draft pick to get off of the Dewayne Dedmon contract, which was a contract that was signed essentially to be traded. And this was a situation where they had to use an asset to get off of Dewayne Dedmon's deal. But now, instead of being about, 150K below the luxury tax, they're 4.86 million under the tax. So they have a little bit more flexibility in trades where you can bring back 125% of the salaries in or out. Like now they can maybe bring back a little bit more salary than they send out, and they have the wiggle room to stay under the tax. They also have the 2 roster spots open. They have to add a 14th player. I assume that's going to be Orlando Robinson, but for him to play through what he's doing, I think that's going to earn him a spot. And then this is the other thing about this. If they do not find a trade that they like here, they also now in the buyout market can use their base annual exception or a portion of their mid-level and still stay under the tax if there's a bidding war for a player that were to get bought out. So to me, this only makes sense if another move is coming. Otherwise, the Dewayne Dedmon signing was really poor asset management. But I'm holding out judgment until we see what happens by Thursday.
Yeah, holding out judgment would be a good thing to do today, because I saw, and Alex, you talk about staying off of Heat Twitter in times like this, but everybody's panicking because they're looking back to the Myers Leonard situation where he was basically signed to be a contract, ended up dumping him for Trevor Ariza. But, the whole idea is, again, the Heat don't know what they're doing. This is what was the common thread, at the very beginning here. But I think some people were celebrating that Spoelstra wasn't going to use Dedmon anymore. But other than that, it was the Heat don't know what they're doing because they signed this guy to be a contract to include in a trade, and now they're not including him in a trade. But it looks like they are at least using the contract to facilitate flexibility to make another trade. So do you come down on this the same place that I guess Greg does, and I do? Where, okay, if you did this to do something else, then again, we should reserve judgment until that something else occurs. And maybe it was a wise move to do this and also to sign Dedmon to that contract, although obviously you didn't want him to play as much as he did. Or if they don't end up doing something else, then this is a disaster.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm more or less right there with Leif and pretty much all of that. Like, I think the Dedmon contract this offseason was ideally supposed to be something that you just, was part of a bigger deal. I don't think they expected him to be as bad as he was. Obviously, he was playing through plantar fasciitis, was aging a bit, and just didn't look as solid as he has in other seasons. I'm trying to be generous here. But really all that has to be said is they traded this guy, this 7-footer, in a time where Haslam is their only other available backup 5, right? Like with Orlando Robinson and his fractured hand, Omer coming back from surgery, them trading Dedmon along with a 2nd-round pick for nothing in return should tell you all about, how effective he's been so far this season. So that's where it's going to end, right? Like we can give him credit for what he's done in the past. That's just the way that it's been this season. So I don't think ideally that he wanted to have to attach a second to move him. But yes, like you're kind of doing the same thing that you signed him for, except just kind of in a different way, right? You know what I mean? Like you're trading Dedmon, and essentially what you would get back for in a trade by using Dedmon's contract without having done this is going to be the same thing now, except now you kind of have a little bit more flexibility. You don't have to worry about what another team, does or doesn't want Dedmon. And, the likely fact of the matter is other teams probably didn't want him. So now you can kind of move forward without having to kind of ask a team to take on a guy like that, where the Spurs just had like 25 million or so in cap room before the deal. So they could just absorb him without taking any, it's not going to affect anything for them. They're the worst team in the league. So it just makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think like this does set up another move, and I'm expecting another move. I think it would be extremely disappointing if they came out from this without having made some sort of move to bolster their rotation, right? Whether, there's different degrees to it. But, if we're being real about it, there is a scenario where this just helps them create flexibility for something in the summer, and they don't do anything.
Oh, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to
No,
hear that.
I'm just
No,
trying- I'm
Alex,
just
I'm
trying to
cutting
get
you off
out ahead
right
of it.
there because Alex, nobody wants to hear that. That nobody's going to tolerate that. Look, I think let's get into the mechanics of what they actually received here, because then we're going to get into some of the players that they might go after, because I think Heat fans are more interested in that than us pontificating about Dewayne Dedmon for 20 minutes. The trade exception that they got, Greg, it's good for a year. It just happens to fit some players that are out there potentially on the market, right?
Yeah, a guy like Grant Williams, who I've reported interest in a couple times, and it doesn't make much sense because it's Boston, and it's counterintuitive to think about a trade with the Celtics. But if they don't want to pay him, this trade exception, in theory, you could absorb Grant Williams into that exception, and basically that would save a ton of money on Boston's side. For instance, this is just an example, because they wouldn't be receiving a Dewayne Dedmon in return, so they would just essentially wipe his salary and the tax ramifications right off their payroll. So there is that chance, but ultimately I would expect it to be a bigger move that involves Kyle Lowry or Duncan Robinson or both. And then that's where maybe having that extra $4 million of flexibility to take on a little bit more, you end up with a little bit better player coming back.
Haven't they let most of their trade exceptions expire in recent years?
They have, correct.
Okay. So, I mean, it could be used.
It's unlikely if we go by history.
Right, but it may not be used. Okay, so the other thing is that they get $5 million in the tax line, gives them more flexibility. On a short-term basis here, with 3 games against subpar teams coming up that the Heat need to win before the All-Star break, they are really shorthanded. Okay, again, Dedmon was not a big factor for them, but they don't have Dedmon. Orlando Robinson's playing through injury. There are other guys that are out. In fact, we're going to get to at the break here who may be out tomorrow. I want to go through that list because they may be down to like 9 or 10 guys over the next 3 games again, while they're in the process of making these moves. And again, if you got to make a move, you got to make a move. You get out ahead of it 3 days before the deadline. I get it. But again, this is another reason why I think Heat fans are going to be frustrated if nothing is done. I do want to talk about the potential, the injury situation here. We're going to do that. Eric Rubenstein, our injury attorney, our personal injury attorney. Check him out at ericrubenstein.com. The Eric Rubenstein Injury Report is brought to you by ericrubenstein.com. He went to St. Thomas University, magna cum laude. He's the guy to go to if you got a slip and fall, a car accident, medical malpractice, any of that kind of stuff. He will help get you your money. He's also a huge Miami Heat fan. So reach out to him at 954-829-ERIC. That's 954-829-ERIC or ericrubenstein.com.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.
Before we get to the rest of the details about where this thing may go transaction-wise, the injury report, Greg and Alex, fill me in again today on what's Orlando Robinson is going to try to play through this thing, right? Oladipo looks like he's out again tomorrow.
That's correct. And then also Kyle Lowry, as you mentioned and alluded to, they've said he'll be out for definitely the next 3 games, then reevaluated, and that could extend beyond that time. So I think that obviously is buying them time while this noise is as loud as ever. But you're right. Like, they could be down to 9 guys. It could be even less than that, because I'm not sure if anyone else could sit out of nowhere. That happens frequently where you have a guy that gets tagged all of a sudden. So to me, it makes it a little weird heading into these next few games. You would expect them to convert Orlando Robinson's contract really soon, because I think they have to carry 14. So they can't go very long without getting another standard contract on the books.
All right, and so let's get to Kyle Lowry here before we go forward, because this plays into potential trades. So Kyle Lowry is going to sit at least the next 3 games. He mentioned that he was going to get his knee checked out. We all know how poorly he's played of late. We all talked about the fact that the Herald put out a piece saying that the Heat were open to trading Kyle Lowry. I said that sounded to me like it was coming from inside the house. That's not the type of thing that the Heat typically leak. But nobody shot it down today like they did the last time that Lowry's name was out there about a year ago. And so, there's so much noise around Kyle Lowry at this point. I had someone who's fairly close to the team say to me today, I'm expecting Kyle to get traded. Okay. And this is somebody who is a supporter of Kyle Lowry, said, I'm expecting Kyle to get traded. I'll go to Alex after this, but I just want to pivot to Greg on this one more thing. Are you expecting Kyle Lowry to get traded now?
I really am. I don't know that there's coming back from this. And just also to your point earlier about them dispelling rumors in the past, for that to get so loud and for nothing to come out behind it and it just to kind of sit there dead, to me, that signals that there is definitely a strain on the relationship. So I don't know how you go forward in good faith. Maybe they're able to just be professionals about it. And I wouldn't doubt that their ability to do that, but it feels a little beyond that. And maybe some of what wasn't said prior is finally just, sitting and marinating to the point that I'm expecting him to probably get traded. I know that that's weak to not just be like, okay, this is what's happening, but these things change quickly. I don't think there's any coming back from this. And I think the fan base feels the same.
So now that we look at that, we say Kyle Lowry is likely going to get traded. I think we're in agreement on that. They have this extra space now because of Dedmon being gone. They've dealt a second-round pick, but they've picked up this trade exception. I'm looking at Toronto right now. And I know we've talked about some of these other teams. I talked about Toronto this morning, Utah, the Clippers, Minnesota, some of the teams that may be in the mix with Miami. I think Toronto holds all the cards right now. It's they have Siakam, they have Anunoby. I've said before how much the Heat love Anunoby. Okay, they would have loved to have drafted him. I think I was actually not generous enough when I said this today, where I said that there are some inside the Heat organization who think he's a top 20 two-way player in the league. They actually think he's better than that. And there's a view that he could be a perfect kind of small ball for sort of a big next to Bam, as we talk about. I guess, Alex, would that be your target right now?
I mean, OG is probably the prime guy that we know is available right now. So I agree with you that the Raptors hold all the cards, not just because of him, but as you said, also Siakam. It's not as clear whether or not they're going to move on from him, although he is an older star. He's in the peak of his career. So, obviously a big time player that could get moved. They also have Van Vliet and Gary Trent, who've kind of, there's been smoke about them getting moved. I don't know how many of these guys they do or don't trade, but it seems like OG is the most likely one to get dealt. And look, I think OG would be an incredible fit, right? Like, I think he doesn't solve your offense and shooting issues, but he fits that role perfectly. It's like, if you got PJ Tucker, except he can guard just about everybody in the league, is 24, 25 years old. And OG has gotten better as a scorer over the years. Like, I'm not saying he's some big time scorer for you, but he can give you some of his own like self-created buckets, some in-between shots. And like he is the best 3-and-D wing in the league, right? I don't, just off the top of my head, I can't come up with somebody who fits that role better. The strength that he brings, he is one of, I don't know, maybe the 5 or 10 best defenders in the league. He's somewhere in that range. Like, he is elite at what he does and has grown over the years. Like you said, the Heat have loved him in the past. So it just seems like somebody that they would love to go after. Now, I'm just not sure how much of their draft capital they're actually willing to give up for OG. Like, I don't know, would they be into something where you got to give up to maybe weekly protected first along with Jovic and then Kyle Lowry? Yeah, like, I don't know if they're into that price, but I'm definitely not surprised that they love him. I think it would be a great fit. Like, again, it doesn't solve your offense issues, but that's somebody that fits now or in the future. Like, it fits both timelines almost perfectly.
Greg, if they are willing to give up Jovic at this point, if they're willing to give up the future first, then this is the kind of player I think they would give him up for, because we're talking about these windows, right? So we've talked so much about Jimmy's window, but we are entering into the start of Bam's window, and you would be adding a player who is 25 years old, who already has, played in big time games with a very, very good team, who can play multiple positions, who's known to be coachable, who plays both ways, obviously, because he's an elite defender. It does seem like this would be a final piece type move for them, where you'd say, okay, we'll give up on the potential of Jovic. We'll give up this first round pick, and we'll give up other things that we need. Now, I guess my question is, Toronto's not that easy to deal with, Greg. Like, I mean, Masai doesn't lose trades. Like, he didn't lose the trade to the Heat either, by the way. He didn't lose the Kyle Lowry trade to the Heat. And he knew, at that stage, Kyle wasn't really looking to return to Toronto because they were supposedly more in rebuilding mode. But I mean, I think he knew Kyle was in decline at that point, and he got a player in Precious, who I don't think the Heat are regretting giving up, but he's become a better player since he's left, which doesn't happen a lot with guys who leave the Heat. So, I mean, how do you make this interesting to Toronto?
I think for Heat fans in particular, but also just generally speaking, when it starts to hurt, when you start to go, oh gosh, are you serious? That's how much it's going to cost. That's when we're getting in the territory where I think we're talking a fair deal. As long as we're feeling good about things, that means it's not enough. So to me, it may end up being that you have to put a Max Strus or a Gabe Vincent in a deal because Toronto is still trying to find pieces around whatever they're building. I don't know how much they strip it down. If all of a sudden you hear that Siakam is traded to Brooklyn, for instance, then that could signal that they're going in a completely different direction, and who knows what they value more, playoff contributors or assets. Just generally speaking, so they have a lot of moving parts still, but I think that they would be a team that would be interested in having good role players. So, all of a sudden is Yurt a guy that has to get thrown into something? He's all of a sudden healthy. Gabe, Max, Jovic, as you mentioned. And then what if it takes, 2 picks on top of Jovic? So you're essentially sending 3 first-round picks. That's the kind of stuff where I think that's what it's going to cost to bid with these other teams. They know that the Heat's draft picks are not going to be top picks. So I think that comes with some level of maybe you have to lose some protections, as Alex alluded to.
Yeah, and we've talked about how the Heat are disadvantaged in the sense that some of their players, most of their players, don't get better after they leave. Other teams know that. And also teams know that the Heat don't tank. So their picks don't have great value going forward because they're usually going to be in the 20s. I'm all in on the Anunoby thing. I don't know that they can get him, but I do think that you can fit pieces around him, Jimmy and Bam. And again, I would anticipate that Tyler's still going to be here. So if that's the case, then you've got 4/5 of your core going forward. I would be all in on that. I think John Collins, to me, which is the other name that kind of gets talked about, and I know he's a bit of a diminished asset at this point. I don't know that I'm all in on the John Collins prospect. I want to get to some of the other stuff that was out there today. I know that Barry had a report about them being interested in Darius. I never pronounce his name correctly. Saric, or it's
you got it right.
I got it right. I always get it wrong. Has he done anything the past 3 years? Because he used to kill the Heat, right? Like, I don't. I mean. He would be like a stretch big 3 years ago.
I guess like the hope trafficker in me could try to present you with a case where that's a good move, but that would be pretty underwhelming if you make this moves and like that's the guy that you get. There was also a lot of talk of like now not having any mid-sized contracts, but Dewayne Dedmon was a mid-sized contract. So they just had one. So I don't know why we're valuing those all of a sudden, but I think it's going to come down to circling back to a Jay Crowder, looking at Jared Vanderbilt, Kelly Olynyk. Those are kind of the next tier down from if you can get in the big sweepstakes of a player like OG Anunoby. And I think that may be a bigger deal, right? Where maybe it involves you having to take a Gary Trent Jr. or a player from a third team because you're having to swap so much salary to actually make that trade work for everyone. So it's hard to really project a deal, but I think on that smaller scale, you're looking at the Jay Crowders. I'm watching Phoenix, I'm watching Utah. And then, you can't deny that Grant Williams situation in Boston, PJ Washington in Charlotte, those are situations where they may not want to retain guys. So those are players to watch as well.
Alex, of everything else that was out there today, and just a lot of rumors, there was nothing really definitive. I mean, the only thing that really happened was Isaiah Thomas, I guess, is joining James Jones in Phoenix, which is interesting. Was there anything else that caught your eye today?
No, It was just cool to see the Heat kind of get going with their trade deadline week. And, you guys were on point. I think it was Leif who was saying, what he would not be surprised if there was a kind of a trade during these games. I mean, these days where the Heat have no games. And he was right on about that. And now, we kind of wait to see what happens. Like, other than that, it's been kind of the same names that we've been talking about forever. I'm with you on Collins, like, not against him completely. I just wouldn't give up a lot for him. I think he's kind of okay on both ends. Same for PJ Washington. They're different players, but those are young players who would fit. They're not essentially like, they're not take you to the next level pieces, but it's cool from a team building perspective. Vanderbilt, Kelly, all those guys are cool to me. The Sarge thing, to me, when I saw it, immediately what came to mind wasn't, the Heat are interested in trading for Sarge on his own. It's more like, they probably wouldn't mind taking him back in a deal for somebody else. But as we've seen before, they probably don't want to give up like a Caleb for a Jay Crowder, right? But, in a hypothetical Crowder plus Sarge type of deal, I could see them going for something like that if they could figure it out with a third team, for example.
Greg, do you see any scenario where a bunch of guys are shipped out?
I mean, if you buy a bunch of guys, it could be Duncan and Kyle. I think that there's worlds
and Max maybe, or Caleb.
Yeah, exactly. Caleb, I don't think so. I have a feeling, although they may be pressed in that regard, that they probably want to keep him around as a cost control player that, really is outplaying his value at this exact moment. I would imagine it's probably going to cost you Max or Gabe, one of those guys that's not locked in long term. But yeah, I would expect them, if they're going to actually do this, to do it. And that, to me, would be like taking Lowry and Duncan and attaching some assets and going shopping and seeing what you could get, and really try to do what they've done previously around Shaq and Dwayne, or around, I guess that's the biggest one I can think of right off the top of my head, because of the parallels of having to basically completely build a new core around those guys, because that's what this is going to take to turn this around.
What's fascinating? The Bet Online, we get these emails from them. They're promotional emails, and they put out, I think there was 10 to 12 players where they put the odds of what team they would end up with if they changed teams, right? So Durant's on there, John Collins is on there. And the ones that for some reason the Heat were associated with were the Bulls players. DeRozan, I don't know if they were on there for Vucevic, but DeRozan and Zach LaVine, they were considered
LaVine to
be top 3 for Zach LaVine. I mean, we haven't discussed that a lot since the summer, right? Like,
no, it's nothing I've heard. So that means it's inevitably going to be what takes place, because that's just the way the universe laughs at me. But that would be an interesting wrinkle that I had not considered. Zach LaVine. Alex would be better at the basketball side of it. I know he's an explosive scorer. I'll take any talent upgrade. So, you're kind of at the point where beggars can't be choosers to some degree.
Bad knee, though, and doesn't really defend, right, Alex?
He's a better defender than Tyler. But that's not saying much, right? The bar is low there. And I'm not trying to talk down on Tyler. It just is what it is. Like, he's made improvements. He just, his body is what it is, like I said. But no, the Zach thing doesn't seem realistic to me. That kind of was confusing me too, just because he makes so much money. I don't have the figure in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's upwards of 40 something mil. And like, so what are the Heat going to do? Kyle and Duncan plus like some picks for Zach LaVine? Other than that, I don't see any sort of scenario, because we know they're not going to do Tyler for him. Like, even if you think Zach is better, which at his peak, he's definitely been better than Tyler. Again, not to talk down on Tyler. I'm just saying when Zach LaVine has gone going, he's looked like he could be kind of a low-level all-star player, 3-level scorer, very athletic. But yeah, he's had the knee issues, and he's kind of declined a little bit since. He was at the top of his game before, and now let's say he's around 85% of it. So yeah, he's like an interesting on his own. But once you start going over the context, how to make it happen, it's just very confusing. The Vucevic one actually seems a little bit more realistic, just because he's an expiring contract at 22 mil. So if you could somehow figure out something around Duncan, I just don't know like what the Bulls would be taking for him. So like, do they want to take on Duncan's contract to get off Vucevic, who's an expiring? So all of these things just seem a little bit unrealistic. Like Vucevic off the bench will kind of be a luxury, right? You could theoretically play him next to Bam. Maybe it's not your starting front court, but that's kind of just an interesting kind of thing that we haven't necessarily talked about. But the Bulls I think are still in the play-in mix, so I'm not really sure what's going on with them and if they're going to sell.
They're also not a team that likes to sell because of their market. So typically they don't sell a whole lot. They also have difficulty getting free agents to come there for whatever reason. The one thing I'll say about the deadline, I know, Greg, you said guys come out of nowhere, but I even think back to the Lowry acquisition, the Oladipo acquisition. Like, we were right on that. Like, we knew what was going to happen at that stage. Like, I feel like we don't have as much of a handle on it this time because the league is so strange this time around. But like, we knew they were going after Kyle, and if they didn't get Kyle, they were going to pivot back to Oladipo, and we nailed it the night before. That's exactly what they did. Like 10 minutes left in the deadline, they finalized the Oladipo deal, right? They got him from Houston. I don't have as much of a sense of what they're up to this time because I don't know what other teams are up to. I don't know. Usually I get a lot of information, just talking to people around the league and other teams and what they might be doing. And then it's like, oh, we talked to the Heat about this. I don't get that sense. I just think it's just such a strange year. Like, there's no clear contender in the league. Nobody really fears the teams at the top. There's a lot of teams around 500 that were supposed to be better. There's teams like Minnesota that went all in this summer and they're kind of average. So you don't know which way they're going to go. You don't know which way the Bulls are going to go. The Raptors are not a team that typically sells off. Like, it's weird. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I think that's the thing. So we will try to keep you updated as much as possible. EricRubenstein.com. Check him out. A personal injury attorney. BetterEdge.com. Use the code 5RSN. Prize Picks. Use the code 5FIVE. But the one thing I think we all agree on is OG Anunoby would seriously upgrade this team now and into the future. So let's see if they can get that done. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Regional Sports Network.